Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to yet another edition of the Lamboms Show. Today is Monday, October 18th, 2021, and we are back on our show. It's been a while. I have not been in good health for the last 2 weeks, but I'm glad I'm back here. And the last time we came on, we were talking about cheating. I guess that's where we ended up. And there was a lot that we unpacked with that. Today, we want to get into something else that is a little bit off because it's not something you hear very often. But we want to delve into one, I call it a toxin. It's something that intoxicates relationships. We really don't take good care of it, but it's something that we need to pay attention. We need to pay attention to it. But before I go on, I really wanted to take the time to, I want to mourn the passing of one of my mom's friend. Every death comes as a shock. Nobody, even for people who are sick, who are like, they have been told that they're going to die, is always a shocking experience. Not for the person dying, but for those who are mourning. And I woke up on Sunday morning to the news of my mom's friend, one of those with whom we grew up, that she passed on. And I really wanted to take the time to celebrate her. I want to say it's a sad moment. And those of us who grew up in Damukon Street, these last weeks have been really trying. Mamin Jawa was the first one who passed, or before that, Ban Chitu, Mamin Jawa, and now Miriam Fointama. So again, that's life. My condolences to all the bereaved families, especially to Protus and Linda, and we continue life's journey. Having said that, let's roll on. My voice is not the best, but I guess I insisted that we get on. And BK, thank you for always accepting to come on, even when you sense that my energy level is not there. But we are going to ride on. And the topic for today is about narcissism. Being narcissistic is not something we hear about very often, but it's a great psychological disorder. It is that absurd love of oneself, an exaggerated love of oneself. And the starter for me is going to be this, BK. The commandment says you should love as you love yourself, isn't it? So the starting point for every love relationship is love of self. If I don't love myself, I cannot love the other person. Therefore, why is narcissism a problem? Why is being narcissistic a problem? I guess it should not be, isn't it? So, and I tease this off in my little art today by saying, especially for us men who have our egos already on our way. I mean, it's already built up something that prevents us from becoming true lovers, because we are now looking at this within a particular lens, how that is bruising that ego. And so when you add to it, I guess, being narcissistic, the relationships are bound to fail. But tell us, what do you think?
Good evening, Lambert. It's good to be here. I'd like to start by extending my heartfelt condolences to yourself, and obviously we've got Protus and Linda in our prayers. I hope that they find the strength to accept and to learn how to relate with their lost ones on a higher level, at a spiritual level, to connect with them spiritually. They are that handle to God. See, because we're all spirit, and when we die, that spirit, which is the essence of who we are, goes back to God, and these people become pretty much our handles to God, much as saints in the Catholic world are entities that we pray to, that we connect with in order to get in touch with God. So just thought I'd throw that out there to let these people understand that we're all one. We share their pain and we're with them in one accord. So let's come back to your definition. You said the holy or the sacred books, it's not just the Bible. Any sacred book on this planet will tell you that love starts with self. So you start by loving yourself. So what does that tell us about narcissism? It's a clear indication that we have grossly misunderstood narcissism. See, what I like about this show, Lambert, is that you and I always seem to redefine things. We always seem to give a new look, bring new perspective into things. So who really is a narcissist? I think this is a word. It's energy that is grossly misunderstood. So we confuse it for an obligate and almost symptomatic, chronically symptomatic love of self. I would actually say you can't talk about narcissism or a narcissist without talking about trauma. And I would describe it as a trauma. I would describe a narcissist as a traumatically compromised individual. What do I mean by this? We all go through life, we all struggle with the challenges, the difficulties that we face. Unfortunately, it's not everyone who knows how to navigate this path. Some people navigate the challenges that befall them better than others. So, who's the narcissist? The narcissist, in my opinion, is someone who is so deeply deprived, so severely emotionally deprived that they would do anything for attention. They'll do anything for love. They're a bit like a black hole. Doesn't matter how much light you shine into it, it will just absorb it and consume it and subsume it. So that is the way I see. That's the way I would define a narcissist. Somebody who is so scared, someone who so badly needs to be the center of attention. They need to be in the spotlight in order for them to feel like they are a somebody. So obviously there are two ends to this spectrum. So you've got the narcissist who is entirely entitled and they think the world owes them. Or you've got the sophisticated narcissist who understands that in order for them to wield power and authority, they have to be somebody. So they work hard to come out of their demise, but the reason they do that is because they want to be recognized. So when they come to that place of, call it fruition, their trophy is not their success, because that success becomes their demise. When they succeed, they are succeeding for others. And these others that they succeed for actually have to laud and applaud them. And who typically are these people? Their loved ones, those who are closest to them. And that's the conundrum, because the person who's closest to the narcissist would usually be their prey. But then we forget, now, are they preys? Are they predators? Or are they victims in and of themselves? I'd like you to chime in here, because I'm sure I've touched on so many different things and we can take this in so many different angles. If you have something to say, I'd like you to say it before we plow on.
So I like the definition, but again, let's start off like you normally do. We are all energy, isn't it? And in order to build the synergy, we have to play around and bring that together. But when the energy you meet is an energy that is traumatically compromised, that means the person has had experiences in life that the person has not used the experiences to shape the person in a particular way, isn't it? Traumatically, compromised. That's heavy to define somebody as traumatically compromised. But then you also go further to talk about the person is so scared that he's badly in need of attention. What are some of the things that will push somebody to be so in need of attention? Because I think there are people who really just shy away from the spotlight, isn't it? You see somebody who has attained so much, I don't know in terms of what, academics or whatever the paradigm you use. But then those accolades are not what they want to be known by. They are so humble, isn't it? Very few people get to that level. And so I'm tempted to think that most of us are just narcissists in a certain form. isn't it? That because I mean, we all want to be recognized for something. That is why we are doing what we do. You go out, you work hard so that you can come home and say, "Oh, Daddy, welcome home." Isn't it? You did well today. What is wrong with that?
So that's the thing. You've touched on 2 points. You've touched on the 2 opposite ends of the spectrum. On the one hand, you've got those who are enlightened. They understand that they are just a tool. And for that tool to come to fruition, they need to grow it. They need to groom it. They need to self-actualize. And once they self-actualize, it puts them on a pedestal where they can actually serve. And that's why we're here. We're actually all here to render service. And if we're doing it, so if we're rendering service in the area of our gift, then guess what? We become fulfilled. So the reward becomes that which we do, the service that we render becomes its own reward. And any financial remuneration that comes off the back of it is pretty much an added extra as opposed to the thing that motivates us. So again, you mentioned the fact that we all want to be recognized. What part of us wants to be recognized? So the part of you and I that seeks recognition is the part that is affiliated to and connected with our senses. That's the flesh. The part that feels pain, the part that gets to be gratified. That is a bit that seeks recognition. Your soul doesn't want to be recognized because your soul is aware of who and what it is. In fact, your soul is the one that feels pain when you go out there and you make a fool of yourself. When you and I go out there and we make fools of ourselves because we're actually looking for attention, we grieve. When we lose a loved one, we grieve. What's happening? The body feels pain. And the soul is actually trying to communicate with us to let us know that we're going in the wrong direction. Because that thing that we think is lost has actually just been transformed to a state and a stage where we can better relate with it because it has gone back to energy, it has gone back to spirit. So you realize that we find ourselves in this space. So we find ourselves in this space where we lose ourselves in self because we seek recognition. And recognition is really, so seeking recognition is proof of the fact that we don't really know who we are. We don't understand what our purpose is because our identity is not locked in what we have achieved. Our identity is locked in a concept that can neither be quantified nor qualified. It is locked in that concept we call love. It is locked in that concept which enables us to serve. It is locked in that thing which allows us to make a difference, serve a purpose that is bigger than the self. That is who we are, really. So for as long as we are on a path, I call it downward spiral, where we do things to be patted on the back, we lose our way because it takes us further away from our actual purpose. See, because when you actually find your purpose, you realize that you may be doing the exact same things you used to do, but you do them differently because your approach is completely different. I mean, I'd always say when you look at the world differently, whatever it is that you look at starts changing. So when we look at things differently, those things begin to change. When you engage, and you engage because you are looking to make a difference, you are not really bothered by the recognition that you get. Although you will be recognized, you don't work for that recognition. The thing that you do and the difference it makes, the service that you render, is what gives you recognition. Now, see, let's look at how much of a conundrum this whole thing is. When we work for recognition, what are we doing? What are we saying in effect? It means it doesn't matter what difference we make. It doesn't matter what purpose we serve. If someone does not laud and applaud us, we don't feel gratification. How painful can that be? You notice we would have surrendered our power, our fortitude, our identity to others. You start living for other people as opposed to living for yourself, living with a purpose. Are we on the same page?
Absolutely.
So, did you want to chime in?
So, in a certain sense, yes, because when you do something for the sake of that thing, whether recognition comes or not, that's something else. But what I'm pointing at is, isn't it just natural? Is it not just a natural disposition that even when you are that disinterested in what you do, I mean, that disinterest, not in terms of you're not paying attention, but because you're doing the thing for the sake of the thing itself, okay? The value of the thing is not what others ascribe to it, isn't it? You do it, you like it, it's your passion, and whether the accolades come in or not, you feel that sense of fulfillment, isn't it? But I find it difficult to imagine that we can go through life just doing things like that, like blind. And the moment the accolades come in, it looks like there's a light bulb. Say, oh wow, people are seeing this thing that I'm doing, so it must be a good thing. And then in a sense, you lose the value then because you now start chasing the people to make sure that what you are doing is what they are really looking for. And I'm saying this, I mean, from a media perspective, isn't it? As a journalist, you have to be able to build up an audience in terms of what the audience wants. And so if you are doling out something just for the sake of it, and by the way, for the sake of everybody, BK and I have been here since January, isn't it? We have never received a dime. So we are doing it for the sake of the show itself. If the other things come on, great, of course. Who doesn't want to? But if I had a sponsor or somebody who was putting money into this, it would change the perspective because I'll be doing things to make sure that I merit what the person is. For the sake of the show, because we believe in what we are doing, there's a higher good just beyond, hey, good job. Do I make sense? But my question more is, isn't it just natural to want praises?
It is a byproduct. Again, like I said, that recognition is fleshly, instant gratification. It suits the wiles of the flesh. It meets us at that point of need from a physical, fleshly perspective. And like you rightly identified, it becomes a distraction. It is that thing that eventually helps us to lose our way. So like you rightly identified, when I find my purpose, what does it mean to find my purpose? It simply means I discover something that I love, want to do, enjoy doing. I'm good at doing it. And most importantly, people need it. And we know that needs are not things that can be satisfied perpetually. Needs are dynamic, so they will change. And the wind of change will always blow in a direction that we can, flow in. It will grow in a direction that our gifts, our talents, capabilities can very seamlessly flow in. So as the needs change, we too morph with that demand, and we realize there's going to be a certain flow, because these needs, as dynamic as they are, at some point they become like our bearings, and they show us the path, what path we should follow. See, because don't forget, ultimately we are light, and as light, we're called upon to empower, we're called upon to enlighten. So let's go back again. You're doing something that you love, you're good at, people need, and by and large, to some extent, some are willing to pay for. That's when you move from something that you love doing becomes a hobby, becomes a vocation. After you've maybe experienced it as a profession, it becomes a vocation. You build a mission, put a vision into it, and guess what? That becomes your purpose. Now, when you engage in doing these things, in meeting people at this point of need, what is it that drives you? It is meeting the need. It is not the people. And the more of that need you meet, the more interest it will generate. And as that need shifts, then you shift with the need. And obviously you will always have guiding principles. See, because if you're meeting a need, usually there are three things that you want to look at. Three things you want to ask yourself. How do you know you are on track? So the first thing is what you're doing, does it feel good to you? It may or may not feel good. But then, does it serve the greater good? And is it good for you? So those are the questions you want to ask. Because for as long as you stay on your path, you're doing something which may or may not feel good immediately. You see, because instant gratification can be dangerous, and sometimes it could help us lose our path. Whatever it is that feels good in the moment. There is short-term pleasure, short-term gain, and long-term pain, and there is short-term pain, long-term gain. So we need to be careful when we look at things from that perspective, how pleasurable they feel. But then the ultimate question is that thing good for you? Exercise every morning at 4 a.m. doesn't particularly feel good when you start, but I'm sure you'd agree with me, it is good for you. And does it serve the greater good? So by and large, the thing that you're doing, is it inspiring people? Is it enlightening people? Is it empowering people? Giving them the tools that they need in order to become the people that they want to be? See, because that's the audience you're looking for. Because if it's otherwise, if it's just about meeting people's needs for gratification, we might as well all become drug dealers. So we will be meeting people's need and we will be having a wide following, but then are we serving the community per se? See, because when you're doing something which is good for you and serves the greater good, you will always find people who need that thing in society. There's always going to be a demand for it.
BK, let's circle back to relationships and let's get into the narcissist who is in a relation. Is he getting into the relationship for himself or for herself? And how does this really play out to such a level that it becomes a problem? Because you mentioned the fact that you asked the question whether the narcissist becomes a predator or a victim. And I'll add both, isn't it? In a certain sense, he's both a predator and in a certain sense, in another sense, he's a victim, isn't it? But let's look at it in terms of a relationship. How would somebody identify whether they are narcissistic? Or how would you identify that your partner is? What are those signs to watch out for?
So the telltale signs, you realize, A, there's absolutely nothing that you do that is good enough. They are center stage. They are in the spotlight. It's always about them. So you become a tool that they use to meet their needs. You're that stepping stone to their next gratification. And so, how do you know you're dealing with a narcissist? So we've talked about the fact that your narcissist is someone who needs validation, as in they need validation 24/7. It means this person will not take kindly to correction. You can't point them in the right direction. Whenever you do, hell breaks loose. When you catch them out, see, because obviously will, we all are vulnerable. The narcissist is extremely shifty. So when the narcissist is wrong and you corner them, they will move to some other thing, turn it around, put it on you, and then castigate you. They don't take responsibility for anything whatsoever. So it doesn't matter what you come with, they will find some angle that makes you responsible for whatever it is you are highlighting. So those would be the telltale signs. And you will notice again, they always come first. They always look out for their interests. Now, if your interests are met in the process, then great, good and fine, nice and dandy, but that's not their prerogative.
That is kind of a difficult situation to live in.
It is an impossible situation to live in. See, because as far as the narcissist is concerned, they are entitled. And your principal role is to meet them at their point of need. That sense of deprivation that they feel, that deep sense of loss, that obligate need for love, obligate need for attention, obligate need to be recognized, obligate need to be valued. The burden of that weight rests on your shoulders. And so if you are happy, automatically a narcissist becomes miserable. Because why should you be happy? Someone who believes the world owes them everything. So if anyone is smiling, they should be the ones smiling. And by and large, if you're going to smile, then ideally it should be because they made you laugh, in which case they are responsible. They gave you permission to be a part of that world that belongs to them. So for the narcissist, it's really all about them. They don't necessarily go out to hurt you. It is just that because you are a tool designed to satisfy their needs, whatever it is they do is designed to tap into you, tap into your energy, which is why they're called energy vampires. They will suck you dry. And for some narcissists, it gets worse because the more miserable you are, the more vulnerable you are, the more elated they become because your pain validates them. Because you're dealing with someone who lives in a world where in order for them to be up, someone has to be down. You being down reminds them that they are worthy. They have power and they've got authority. So two people can't have power and authority in a narcissist's world. One person is in control. Slave-master relationship. And that is the only way it works.
So again, if you're just joining us, you're on the Lamboms Show, and we're talking about narcissism within relationships as a lethal toxin. It's a killer. Azem's welcome. He says, I don't come, I salute you. Welcome.
Welcome, brother.
So, BK, what causes this narcissism? What is it that leads people to these call it to this bad attitude. Because again, like we have established already, there is some form of natural admiration or want for admiration, isn't it? We've talked about those basic needs. Wanting to be recognized, there's nothing wrong with that, but it is that exaggerated sense of it whereby, like you just said, the inability to accept correction. Somebody points out anything to you, it becomes, oh, your world is crumbling because of something that was pointed out to you. It is that sense of perfection or near perfection which somebody wants to have around. They don't identify with weakness in any form. But what causes this kind of narcissism that will eat somebody to this point?
So there are a number of things, and it usually goes way deep. If you want to trace it, you trace it all the way back to childhood. You see, life is a journey, and we all come into life. There's a study that tells you that if a child is put to birth and you feed that child, you can give that child, meet them at their need nutritionally. So food, water, oxygen, and everything that is physical in terms of nourishment. If you don't touch that child, the child eventually dies. It does not survive. So children actually need touch. That tactile, that whole tactile construct. They need it for their development. That is how they experience love when they grow up. So in childhood. And again, you would notice these are fundamental needs that we've talked about. We want to be safe, we want to be secure, and we want to be comfortable. We want to be appreciated. From childhood, you can see that. When a child seeks attention, it is because it wants to be appreciated, it wants to be loved. So what happens to a child who's deprived of these implements? They start adapting, they start adjusting. Now we can adapt in positive ways, we can adapt in negative ways. So for a child who does not feel loved, what do? Some can become a nuisance unto others, and that is the way they adapt. They throw tantrums. They become a bit, what's the word I'm looking for here? They go off the grid. So you see a child who is rotting in the deepest depth of pain, and they have to somehow process that energy which they do not understand. So they grow up deprived. They don't receive love. They feel unloved. They feel unworthy. They have no one to talk to. No one listens to them. No one acknowledges them. So you survive in a world that is hostile. But then again, how do we deal with these things growing up? Usually, we shove things under the carpet. This is where the word cognitive dissonance comes into play. We go through an experience and we pretend that experience never happened, but it is locked somewhere deep in our subconscious. And the only way we get to experience these traumatic traumatic periods is when we're going through life unsuspectingly, something happens that serves as a trigger. This trigger reminds us of something in the past that was painful, and then we react to it. So now look at it from this perspective. Let's say it's a bit like something happens to you. You suppress it. You drop it in your subconscious. That thing carries a label. After a while, it loses its label, but it is still in your subconscious. You're going about your business. There's a trigger somewhere. And that trigger could be someone behaving in a way that reminds you of that experience that you had in the past. It triggers that thing. You feel the sensation, you feel the emotions, because they'll always tell you that we are energy. And the way we form memory when we go through an experience, you have nerve endings that wire together. When they fire together and you find yourself in an emotionally charged situation, that gets locked as memory. And as I was saying, you store that. If it's a bad experience, eventually you forget it completely. Then when you go through an experience unsuspectingly, somebody does something, it triggers that particular feeling or emotion, and it brings it to the surface. Now, depending on how traumatic that was, you want to protect yourself from it. So you go through life ensuring that you do not have to go through these experiences. It puts you on the counter offensive most of the time. So if someone remotely does something that reminds you of that dark past, you get on that counter offensive to protect yourself. So we've always talked about the fact that so Stacy says male and female children who experience domestic violence in their household are at risk of having narcissistic personality and disorders. Yes. So this is exactly what we are talking about. You have all these experiences that have been internalized over a long period, and these children at growing up, they can't quite make sense of what is going on. They don't have an outlet, you see, because at that stage you are vulnerable. The same people you depend on for protection are the same people who abuse you. So how do you deal with it? You internalize it. You find coping mechanisms. And again, we will always be coping in negative as opposed to positive ways. Does that make sense so far?
Right. So again, I think the point that Stacy makes is quite important because I think she expounds on what you said earlier on, isn't it? The early years as children, how we are cuddled, how we are touched, plays into how we become, if we become narcissistic. If you do not have that constant touch, it plays out later on, isn't it? And I think it's very important for us to take note about that, especially for those of us who have kids. The way we interact with our kids at home. You know, very often they say that these things influence relationships in the future. And we believe that it is by people saying, oh, don't do that. No, the children are picking up the body language. They are seeing how you are treating each other. And that is translating into how they themselves, what they are picking up. And the traumatic experience or traumatic experiences that they have, they play them out in life. And I really believe in, I call this a lethal toxin because it is the elephant in the room that we really don't address often, isn't it? We don't take time to address it. You want to ask, what is wrong with me? Not what is wrong with the other person. What is wrong with me? What is the checklist I need? Okay. I'm saying we should be able to ask ourselves, and I said for men especially who have very big egos, there's a slippery slope towards becoming narcissistic. And I'm not just bashing, because we have often said here, as men, our focus here is to talk about how we can improve on our relationships, isn't it? And we can look back at some of these things. Our relationships with our parents, our relationships in the family. How did that make us prone to becoming narcissists or narcissistic? And because of that, if you are a narcissist, again, that relationship is heading somewhere else, except your partner too is narcissistic in a certain sense.
It's
But
important to realize, Lambert, as well, that the narcissist is extremely intelligent. You could call them birds of prey, in quotes, because they will look for people who are vulnerable. When you talk of a narcissist on the one end of the spectrum, you typically will have an empath on the other end of the spectrum. So empaths are people who they want to love, they're nurturing, they want to take care of people. And these are the kinds of people, these are the kinds of persons or personalities that narcissists would typically go looking out for. See, because it's a bit like that match made in hell. You have one person who loves to give, and you have this other person who's all about taking and receiving. Now, I want to go back to the question you asked. We were talking about that whole pathway to becoming a narcissist, and we pretty much want to highlight the fact that it is so the narcissist is something that we create collectively. I would never look upon a narcissist as a prey per se, as in blaming. I wouldn't want to point a finger. See, because when we go back to that original definition of who or what a narcissist is, someone who is, what was that definition again, Lambert, just to make sure that you were paying attention? We said someone who was traumatically
hold on.
compromised.
Yes. Traumatically compromised individual, isn't it?
Yes.
So
So
scared that they are
traumatic,
badly in
yes,
need of attention.
exactly. So traumatically compromised. So you notice you can't talk about a narcissist without talking about trauma. And the question is, where did this trauma come from? We go back again to communication. See, because communication is the one thing that helps us understand and navigate our world. Communication is the one thing that helps us gain exchange energies and build synergies. We understand values. We build ourselves up to a point of, call it enlightenment, and ultimately to that place where we can then self-actualize. So for a child growing up, if they're growing up in an environment that is hostile, like you said, the hostilities that they see are normalized. It could be hostilities that they see exercised between their parents or within the environment that they grow up in. It could be hostilities that are directed towards them per se. They have to make sense of all these impulses that come their way. And the question is, how do they pack all these different emotions? How do they pack these sensations? What do they associate with as self? And what do they associate with as non-self? What do they define as good? What do they define as bad? What do they define as fair? What do they see as unfair? So to a child growing up, all these words that are just used don't mean anything. All that they experience is discomfort and comfort. And if they are building a vault of discomfort, if they are building a treasure trove of discomfort, then all they do growing up in life is doing everything they can to avoid that discomfort. So it gets beyond a certain threshold, gets so bad that everything for them and to them becomes a threat, including that life partner. And of course, they will pick their life partner very carefully. It doesn't mean they do it deliberately. They just make sure that they're dealing with someone who is not offensive, someone who's all accommodating and hasn't got a rough bone in their body. Those are the kinds of people or persons they will gravitate towards. And obviously, at the beginning, they would be extremely charming. So you ask the question, how do you identify a narcissist? At the beginning, they will be extremely very charming. They're not charming necessarily because they understand that for the value of giving, the value of sharing. They're being charming because it's an investment. So they are investing in you, and they know that down the line they will cash in on that investment. But it all happens so naturally because to them it is all about survival of the fittest. So I don't necessarily look upon a narcissist as that person who goes out there to hurt others. No, they have to survive. They've learned that it's all about them. It's all about the self. And they have to take care of number one because nobody will. So from a cognitive perspective, as in their awareness, not their subconscious, in their awareness, they can think, I need to love this person. But when rubber meets the road, for them, it is all about survival. That person that they are with, that they need to love, becomes a threat. And once that person becomes a threat, that whole rivalry thing kicks in. And it's about getting the resources because there are not enough resources for two. So the narcissist is something that we create collectively as a society. And I don't believe it is the responsibility of the narcissist to take care of himself. It is our collective responsibility to learn how to deal with narcissists. Which then brings us to the next question. How do you live with a narcissist?
Just before we get onto that, Stacy makes a couple of points, and she's pointing to risk factors. She says abandonment is another risk factor, that is divorce, foster care, fatherless homes, etc. And mental illness left untreated, that is clinical depression, bipolar disorder, etc. So again, very important for us to be able to identify these. I'm more intrigued with the thing about abandonment, isn't it? You talked about being tactile, and deep into that is what she's referencing here with respect to that abandonment. And I hate to say, maybe fatherless homes are more, but we also have motherless homes. The mothers who are present physically but really emotionally absent, isn't it? So that form of abandonment, you want to speak to that and to how this predisposes people to become narcissistic.
Yeah. So again, what is abandonment? When we go back to our old definition, which is words don't mean anything until we give them meaning. So abandonment simply means you are depriving someone of something that they need for sustainable growth and development. Once you abandon them, you have cut them off that supply. You've left them to their devices. It means they need to adjust and adapt. They have no bearings. They have no guidance. When they stumble and fall, they fall further because there's nothing to correct them. When a child throws a tantrum, it is because it wants something. Now, in this child's little mind, sometimes it's adults as well, because you have scenarios where you've got a 5-year-old trapped in a 40-year-old's body, and you think you're dealing with an adult. No, you're dealing with, I don't want to say a retard, but you're dealing with a child. And that would be a classic example of that kind of abandonment. See, because abandonment will end up producing this 50-year-old who really is a 5-year-old trapped in a 50-year-old's body. And so because they are more sophisticated, because they are successful in earthly terms, have a good job, have a big bank account, we tend to associate that with some kind of maturity. We assign responsibility to these people, forgetting that we're really dealing with a child. We're dealing with an abandoned child who feels deeply and severely deprived. A child who has grown in a world understanding that in order for them to get something, someone else has to lose. A child who has grown believing that what they need, they can and should get at all costs. So this is a demise which a child growing with parents or with guardians, and when I say parents and guardians, I mean parents and guardians in the strict sense of the word, people who can actually guide. Now, a child who has grown in the luxury of this kind of environment will be guided. It's not everything that they want that they get. And when they don't get it, then they are told and educated as to why they're not getting it and how that thing is detrimental to them downstream. Now, for a child who hasn't got these luxuries, each time they are denied something and denied the explanation that would have empowered them into seeing why that thing needed to be delayed, they feel abandoned. Each time they hear no, they feel abandoned. And so you realize they go through life, when they are rebuked, they feel abandoned. They feel unloved. So you notice we're using all these different words, and they are really building blocks of the same thing, that feeling of being unloved, that feeling of being deprived. And I don't believe we've got enough words in the English dictionary to capture, to articulate, and to explain the different feelings and emotions that children go through, which is why we don't know what to do with these people when they grow as an adult and they start manifesting all the different ailments and conditions that they eventually manifest. We talk about bipolar and you ask yourself, what is that exactly? We talk about multiple personality disorders and you wonder, what are these? Now, in my opinion, these are simply ways of adjusting. These are mechanisms that people come up with to adjust. Because look at the life cycle of depression. We know that in life, pain is not an option. We will all go through pain. Stress is optional. We can go through pain depending on how we deal with that pain. We may be stressed or we may not be stressed. If we see it as a problem, stress kicks in. If we see it as an opportunity, well, it will be painful, but we don't disintegrate. We don't descend into stress, distress, and duress. Now, if we get into stress and we're stressed over a long and protracted period, and it's not changing, then it becomes suffering. You see, because even stress we can do something about. We can reverse it, come back to a place where we overcome that stressful situation. We learn and we come up higher. Now, but then if that is not happening, we move from stress to a place of suffering. And how does that differ from stress? Suffering is different from stress because in that state and headspace of suffering, we tell ourselves that our situation is untenable, it is unsustainable, but there's absolutely nothing we can do about it. We just have to accept it and live with it. That's when life starts losing meaning. We stop catching up with friends, meeting up with friends. We stop doing the things that used to bring us gratification. Our hobbies fall by the wayside. And that is the onset of depression. So what has changed here? from a place of suffering to a place of depression. What exactly is it that changes? See, we're still talking about relationships here, because it's a slow progression. And your narcissist is fighting all of this by using other people to ensure he doesn't get to a place of depression. But do they almost always invariably get there? Well, most of them do, because they will then turn to substance abuse. Most narcissists, if you look at them, the way they deal with pain, the way they deal with difficult situations is they drink or they're on drugs. It's always going to be one thing or the other, one outlet or the other, because they cannot find any one person who will satisfy their needs, their deepest desires. Because the insecurity is so deep, so deeply rooted that not even they understand it. But let's just complete the trend. See, because we're talking about some of the things that Stacy brought up. She equally mentioned depression. So let's look at the difference between suffering and depression. While you're in this state of suffering, you're still interacting and engaging with the world back and forth. You still occasionally, so it's a mishmash. Your circumstances are dire. There's nothing you can do about it. But at least you still have your hobbies. So from time to time, you find solace. But as you descend into that depression, that depressive state, the things that used to give you solace drop to the wayside, because the stress has overwhelmed you. Because if you live in a situation where nothing is right, everything seems to be an uphill struggle, you become overwhelmed. And that overwhelm only increases by the minute, not even just by the day. So eventually you get into depression. And in that depressed state, what have you got left to deal with? It's just your mind. No more physical activity. You're not going jogging. You're not meeting out with friends. You're not engaging, embracing your hobbies. And these are the things that would normally help you to release endorphins and oxytocin, dopamine, and serotonin. These are the feel-good hormones within your body. These are the things that keep you alive. These are the things that motivate you. In a state of depression, all you've got to cope with is your mind. So you start playing with personality, and this is where you start, because it's all about energy. You create different personalities to deal with different situations. If there is a threat, this personality kicks in. If everything looks normal, this other personality kicks in. And the situation that you find yourself in becomes the trigger for which personality will be on display. And how do I characterize, how do I justify this? You will notice that generally you're one person. For those who are not yet on that path of enlightenment, you will notice you're one person at home with your family. Your personality changes slightly when you're with your friends. You're a completely different person at work. Now, these are multiple personalities, but because these personalities don't directly hurt anybody, we don't call them a disorder yet. When we drive these personalities to their dire end, where they actually become hurtful and harmful to others, the narcissist, for instance, who uses people to meet his needs, it then becomes a condition, because it is overtly and openly detrimental. And it's the exact same thing. The person who's depressed and moving into deep depression, and then it doesn't matter what it is, we give them all these fancy names. It's just the packaging. Because ultimately it is your biochemistry that is doing different things alongside your electrical impulses, your nerve impulses. That is what ultimately is guiding and directing. So depending on how you configure these to adjust and to adapt to your environment, you create the different conditions that eventually get treated, called these different fancy names, and then they are treated, so to speak. So that is how we end in this. We end up in a state where we're having we call them mental health issues, because you're using your mind to cope with the situations that to you are untenable. And you can go out and jog, you can call friends and have a party, you don't have any hobbies you can turn to. That's why hobbies are very important.
So, BK, before we get to the last part, because I really wanted us to be on the hour mark, which is we're going to focus the last part on how to cope with a narcissist. But Marilyn, sorry I missed your comments earlier on. We are grateful. Your reward is in heaven, gentlemen. You are inspiring many. Julius, I keep getting inspired with your teachings. When you mentioned the empath, she said the empath quickly experiences donor fatigue. That's a good one. Empaths also would like to have some care and attention every once in a while. Yes, I think so. That is when, the bubbling starts coming up, because the empath too gets tired, isn't it? You point one thing, the person is always reacting and putting the blame on you. You eventually lose patience too. And I like the way she says it, donor fatigue, because you have become a donor. You get saturated with these things. And you too, how about you have to take care of the self, back to the self, isn't it? What's your response to that, BK, before we get into that last piece?
100% so. And where does this donor fatigue come from? Don't forget, your empath loves to give, and they get their gratification from giving. It means that giving needs to be appreciated, because that is what encourages them to give even more. So when you give and it doesn't feel appreciated, it feels like you're not giving enough. And because your empath actually gets their gratification from giving, they need to feel that what they're giving has been received, because they too are human. And that is the problem. That is where the empath, someone calls them covert narcissists, but I don't subscribe to that.
I was just going to ask you that. I was just about put right there, isn't it?
Yeah, because I guess the reason someone will call them a covert narcissist is because they will give and give and give until they drop. And when they do, they hit depression, then the beast comes alive from within them, because they would have lost it. But then why do they lose it? It's because there is equally that sense of gratification, because like you said, we all want to be recognized. Look at what we're doing, for instance. Ultimately, we need, you and I, Lambert, we need to put food on the table, right? So we may
Absolutely.
love this to kingdom come. But if we did this and we didn't have something else that we could turn to put food on the table, then this could become a chore. It could lose its value, because there is some need that has to be met. And when that need is met, it sustains what it is we're doing, because you and I need that physical sustenance. You need to be able to eat in order to live. And so if there's nothing that meets that particular need, then this whole gig is compromised. So too, your empath needs to be recognized, and that when they feel like what it is they give has been received, is nourishment to their soul. So when they give, the more they give, the more they at some point expect to feel that they're making a difference. Now, if they're not making a difference in spite of all the giving that they give, then they start feeling inadequate. So they're giving not the way they normally would give. They start giving because they want to be recognized. It is in their nature to give, just as it would be in your nature to appreciate. And as long as that's happening, the empath would give to their last and final breath. But when they give, gets to a certain threshold, it doesn't get received or recognized, let alone reciprocated, and they don't ask for much, then they start giving in order to get that validation. They forget that to the narcissist, They are all about validation. So it doesn't matter how much you give. If you're giving, that's what you should be doing as far as the narcissist is concerned. And it's their time, it's their prime. They don't need to give anything back. It's not in their construct, it's not in their DNA to do so.
So, BK, before we, again, I just keep saying before, relationships then become a constant process of using, abusing, and misusing each other. Where you have the narcissist and the empath who unfortunately get together, and so it's a mutual process that becomes quite the formula for, call it domestic violence, call it bad relationships and all that, isn't it?
That's correct. And that's why marriages are doing today what they're doing. Many years back, 10 years back, maybe 15, it used to be 1 in 4 marriages that ended up in divorce. Today is 1 in 2. It's because that balance, as you would notice, as the pressure increases, what does pressure do? Pressure will bring out all the cracks in a system, like COVID did. COVID brings about pressure, brings pressure to bear on the system, and it exposes all the cracks in the system at all levels. If you have underlying conditions, COVID will bring it out. If your health system in your country is suffering, COVID will bring it out. If your politicians don't know what they're doing, COVID will overwhelm that system. It will bring all these weaknesses out. It is the countries that really knew what they were doing, as you would see, for the countries which did not really struggle under COVID, whom I would say had a high happiness quotient. COVID was there, but they could deal with it. So it did not put enough pressure for this. The pressure from COVID was not enough to crack the system. So that's what typically would happen when two people come together and they do not understand what marriage is all about. When two people come to, at least one person needs to understand what marriage is all about so they can educate or help educate and enlighten the other. If two people come into a relationship and it's all for convenience, come, we stay. If it's all about, oh well, we've come to that point, we need to get married so that we can cope, we can survive, we can share, we can split the bills and all of that. At some point, it will crumble. So yes, you are right. It's only when people do not understand why they are there that it crumbles. And this neatly takes us to the last part, which is, how do you deal with a narcissist?
Yeah, so again, just before you get into that part, that's the third time I'm saying just before, but just to those who are coming in, is we have defined a few things about the narcissist. What does it mean to be narcissistic? And bottom line is a kind of an exaggerated selfishness. Somebody who is so much in need of being praised, incorrigible. You can't correct the person. You can't point anything. They will twist it and turn it back to you, isn't it? And we're saying most of our relationships suffer with people like that. And we want to ask yourself whether you fall into that category. What does it mean? Am I a narcissist? Don't look at the other person. I always say here that most of us are like Christians who go to church on Sunday, and when they are preaching, instead of the gospel, the homily touching them, they're looking at who the gospel is going to be touching. Oh, the Father is talking about that one. No, the Father is talking about you too. So again, it's about us. Am I a narcissist? And the danger with these things is that we all live in denial, even though the signs are so clear, but we live in denial. So having gone past that stage, how do you live with a narcissist?
So it's about unpicking the fabric of a construct that has been weaved over a very long period. We're talking 20, 30, 40 years of practice of building this construct, this social construct, this thing. It's deep, dark, and heavy. So in order to live with that thing, You need to understand it. You need to understand that you're dealing with someone who does not know what it means to be told no to. So they don't understand, no, you can't do this. So you don't say no to a narcissist. Once you understand, so there are a number of things we want to look at. A narcissist doesn't know how to deal with no. A narcissist doesn't want to be embarrassed. A narcissist wants to be recognized and admired. And a narcissist will throw a tantrum each time it feels threatened. So what are the no-go areas? Don't say no to a narcissist. Seek clarification. Ask questions. If a narcissist is making a demand that does not sound sustainable, does not sound tenable, you want to ask them what it is they're looking to achieve. Don't forget you're dealing with someone who likes to be praised. So give them a reputation to live up to. That's the very first thing. Keep this at the back of your mind. You want at all times to give them a reputation to live up to. So if a narcissist is making a demand that does not sound sustainable, the kind of demand you need to say no to, you want to ask them to clarify what it is they want. Seek to understand. Ask them if what it is they are requiring of you is what they actually want. Now, if you can show them how it is detrimental to you or to them, to themselves, you are on the right path. I'm trying to see if I can find an example here, because it's always a lot better to talk with examples. So, hypothetically speaking, you have an exam and you're dealing with a narcissist, and this narcissist is your spouse, and they want you to go out partying. And they're putting pressure. Obviously, if you were to say, no, I've got an exam and I need to study for this exam, they feel rejection. What's the word Stacy used? Abandonment. They feel unworthy. But if you were to ask them, you know, someone of your stature needs to have a smart, intelligent wife, because that is the least you deserve. You make it about them. If I were to fail this exam, would I represent and or reflect the kind of woman you want to marry? Now, of course, if it is the woman who's the narcissist, then it's the same thing, the other way around. If I were to fail this exam, would I be reflecting the stature of the caliber of person someone like you should be married to? And I bet you have recognized them, you have raised them. They will actually help you study. You see, because the narcissist is about himself. Now, if you're stuck with one and you can't leave and you just have to cope and manage with them, then you manage their expectations, and it's all about communicating. That's the exact same way you would communicate with a child. There's no difference when you're dealing with a narcissist. You're dealing with a 5-year-old trapped in the body of an adult. If you confuse that for an adult, then that is the recipe for disaster. So like I said, first things first, give them a reputation to live up to. Will you always have the patience to do that? Absolutely not. There are times when you too will run out of steam. So let's say we're in a scenario where things have gone out of whack, out of plaque. It's disaster recovery. He has lost it. What do? Now, don't forget, you can't get into a fight with a narcissist, because when you're fighting a narcissist, he is in the spotlight. And a narcissist being in the spotlight is the height of his excitement. So you can't put them in their place. Because the fact that they are riling you up and getting you bouncing about left, right, and center like a yo-yo gratifies them. You see, because they're good at that game. When you corner them, they will turn, twist, shift, and jump onto the next thing to accuse you on. And then you follow them blindly because they are in control. They know the rules of the game. They discovered this game. So if you're blind, you will be chasing them, running rings, tying a noose around your own neck, and eventually all they'll do is pull it. So never follow them. How do you correct a narcissist? The number of things I want us to touch on. How do you correct a narcissist? When a narcissist has done something that is so clearly, blatantly wrong, ask them leading questions that demonstrate to them that what they are saying is wrong. When you do that, don't rub it in their faces. Be quiet. If they change the subject, don't go there. Gently bring them back. This is where we were. Do you have anything to say? Be quiet. Remembering at the back of your mind that you're giving them a reputation to live up to. When they start stuttering and or babbling, remind them who they are. Again, you're giving them that reputation to live up to. I want to take this slowly and be sure that it actually went through. So you're in a scenario where you want to or you have to correct a narcissist. How do you do it? You don't get into a fight. You ask leading questions. What is it you're trying to achieve with this? Okay, if I did this, how does it serve you? How does it help this connection, which is so important to you? Whatever it is you're doing, you make it about them. And the next thing, which is the final thing, when you're dealing with a narcissist, you want to reward positive behavior. So positive reinforcement. Whenever they veer off and they're being abusive, shut up. Excuse my French, but shut up. And explain to them that, well, you would like for this conversation to be constructive, because that is the one thing you've learned from them. Notice, again, you're giving them a reputation to live up to. You would love for this conversation to be constructive. That is what you have learned from them. And so you're not going to unlearn what it is you have learned from them. So you're not going to be a part of this conversation if they take it to that level. You will recuse and excuse yourself when they are ready to have that conversation. Then you can pick up where you left off. So you would notice that to deal with a narcissist, you need a lot of self-discipline. You need a lot of maturity. You need to be responsible. Over time, this narcissist will realize that the only way they can get what they want off you is by doing something positive. It will take time for them to unlearn what took 20 years for them to learn. But for as long as you are in control of yourself, notice it's not the narcissist you're controlling. you're controlling yourself. So for as long as you control yourself, the narcissist has nothing on you. They can't make you jump. They can't get you hot or cold the wrong way around. So your narcissist is eventually going to help you become the perfect human being. And in you becoming the perfect human being, they will mirror you and reflect you. It brings us back to that whole concept or adage that goes something like, become the change that you seek, and the world will bend over backwards to suit, adjust, or comply with your whims and caprices. Be the change that you seek, and the world will reflect and mirror you. It's as simple as that.
It is a great thing, BK. And the one thing that I have learned is enabling the narcissist to live up to the reputation that the one. It's a great one, and I think it's a great technique. I like us to end on this question.
Are most abusers narcissists? So, Adam, that's an amazing question. As with everything else, narcissism is a spectrum. So, you can be an abuser with a conscience. No, you're not a narcissist. Although, once you have become an abuser, it means you take delight in abusing others, in being abusive, or you use it. You see it as a means of survival. Whenever you feel threatened, you default to abuse. That is on the high end of narcissism. See, because we all are abusive. We're all abusive in ourselves. When I'm downing 6 liters of soda, I know it's not good for me, but it feels good while I drink it. That's me abusing me. When I'm doing things I really shouldn't be doing, I'm supposed to be studying, I'm binge TV watching, I'm abusing myself. So you will notice that we're all abusive. Because if we abuse ourselves, it only goes to say naturally that we abuse others. So the question is, to what extent are we being abusive, and how do we define abuse? See, because that's the other tricky bit. See, because the way you would, I don't know if this is Adam, but if that's not your name, then I'm sorry, because it says Adam, me, fitness and gaming L. But I'll just call you Adam for the purpose of this conversation. You will notice that the way you define abuse is not necessarily the way I will define abuse. So we always have to start by defining the word abuse and abuser. What does it mean? It's just like a sinner. We all sin. Does that make us sinners? If you sin deliberately and you just can't do without sinning because you need it in order to live, you need it to come alive, then that's a problem. Same thing with an abuser, with abusers. The narcissist is just the abuser, the obligate abuser in a relationship. Can you abuse as well outside of a relationship? Of course you can. And abuse is very subtle. No, not subtle is not the word. It is very insidious because it can be positive or negative. If I tell you things about you that are not true, inflated compliments because I want to get something off of you, that is abuse. Do we ever see abuse like that? Flattery is abuse. But is it all flattery that is abuse? Absolutely not. So it always comes back to defining the word so we know exactly where we stand, and then we can take it from there. But then again, to answer the question globally, I would say, as with any vice or any virtue, it's a spectrum. Love on the one hand, fear on the other hand. Those are the two opposite ends of that spectrum.
So, Vicky, I thought that was going to be the last, but Adam has one or two more, and I think
Sure.
they're just along the same lines. Does child abuse cause narcissism? And is there high risk of, if you abuse as a child, to develop narcissism? So again, I think there is some correlation that you may do. I don't know whether correlation is the correct word, correlation and causation. But the one thing we can establish is the fact that most of these disorders, they start off when we are children. They start off from the time how we grow up, isn't it? So there's the possibility that because you were abused, and it depends on what kind of abuse, isn't it? And what you mean by abuse. There is that danger. There's something we call compensation mania, whereby because you lost something at a particular age, when you come of age, you want to make up for that. And the danger within this circumstance is because of a certain abuse at a certain age, a young age, you become an adult, you get into a relationship, you become married, you want to make up for what you lost. And within that context, there is the risk of becoming a narcissist, isn't it? We're not saying that it's a straight line from A to B. There is the danger. That's why Stacey talked about risk factors. But I'll finish preaching.
Did you want me to say something?
Or? Yes. So any comments about the question? That's why I left the question up there. Does child abuse cause narcissism?
All right. So let's look at the etymology of this whole of narcissistic tendencies. So like we said, like as Lambert already articulated, it's not a tap that you switch on and off. It's not something that just happens. It's a progression. It is a process. And the narcissist starts developing at a certain junction. That junction we typically call key decisions. So something happens to you, typically a traumatic experience, and you make a key decision. It's that transitional point where you decide that something will never happen to you again. This experience that I had, never again. But what does that mean? How does that translate downstream? For some people, when they say never again, it's because they are so abhorred by that experience that they want to distance themselves from it. Not only don't they want to experience it, that they don't want to see anybody else go through that. So they model the very opposite of what it is that they went through. But for someone who goes through a traumatic experience and decides to be the victim, and they say to themselves, this will never happen to me again. They take that thing that happened to them, remove the person who did it to them, put that person, assign that person to the world, and the world becomes the enemy. So you start living to prove a point to yourself and to your abusers. That's when someone is more likely to become a narcissist or to become an abuser in any way, shape, or form, or a serial killer, or whatever it is that they eventually become down the line. You see, because as a child, there's something we call, what's that expression? What is this thing? I'm looking for the expression. When you protect your abuser because you think that if you're nice to your abuser, the Stockholm syndrome. If people who are very close to you abuse you and you see yourself as a victim, but You love them so much and you're protecting them, thinking that, oh, well, if you're good to them, maybe they will reduce the abuse. Tendency is you will take that on, project it on the world, and you will find triggers in the world that will serve as an outlet for the abuse that you received as a child. So everyone around you, apart from your abusers, become the enemy. Now, the bad or the sad thing is it's just a survival mechanism, and that could be buried in your subconscious, so you're not necessarily doing it deliberately when you do it. It's just when you come into a situation, into a scenario that serves as a trigger, reminding you of what it is that you went through, the series of emotions, everything that you felt, those feelings that were generated from the emotions that you felt way back then are triggered. And that cascade of feelings kick in. They set a cause in motion, and there is a reflex action or an automatic response that kicks in. And as we all know, what you practice, you become. The more you do something, the more you become that thing. And so you go through life and eventually get to a point where, like we said, the narcissist is born. And you will usually typically see it while that child is growing. The way they will treat dolls, the way they will treat little animals, the way they will, it's usually insidious. You see it growing. So does child abuse again cause narcissism? The answer is yes and no. It depends. Because you can put two people in the same situation. No two people will appraise that situation in the same way. Joyce Meyer was abused by her parents, mom and dad. She is a well-renowned evangelist, helping people in all walks of life, in all kinds of situations. Madonna, as well, was one of those, the musician, severely abused. But see how these people turned out. So it is different for different people. For some, abuse makes them. So typically what I say is, when you're put under pressure, that which is within you will come out. If you carry darkness in you, it will come out. If you carry light in you, it will come out. It just forces you to be somebody. And generally there's that split. The person who has got the victim mentality becomes the villain, and the person who has got that positive mindset or the victor mentality becomes the angel. So the question is, up until that point in your life, how have the circumstances of your life conditioned you? Because we can learn in two ways. We can learn the positive. We can take the positive from the bad things that happen to us, just as some people are actually compromised by the good things that happen to them because they become entitled or they feel entitled. We all see it. Children who grow up, they have everything that money can buy. Usually there's some compromise somewhere. Or usually there's a caveat somewhere, and that's true. But you see kids grow up in the same household. They're brought up by the same parents. They are thrown, everything is thrown at them to ensure that they become the best that they can be. Yet one becomes a lawyer, the other one becomes a drug addict. And you're wondering, how did that happen? We gave them both the exact same upbringing. Why is this happening? It can never be the exact same upbringing, because people see things differently. The one who became the drug dealer could have thought the other one was favored because there are things he wanted and did not get and that the other one got. But he may not realize that those things that the other one got, that other one did not even want, and vice versa. But then one adjusted well, the other one did not adjust well. So it's really not about abuse. Ultimately, it's just about how we appreciate the world, how we taste the world with our senses, and what we make of our experiences, and how those experiences shape us. That's ultimately what determines who we will become.
A very deep topic for today. BK, your last words. And I want to thank Stacy for proposing a topic for us for next week. We talk about the need to survive and the lack of fulfillment or void in one's life. Maybe there could be a discussion about the hierarchy of needs. We know that when needs are not met, they break down relationships. So let's talk about needs and break down relationships next week. Uh, Bongaman, welcome. Internal perception of the world around you. Exactly. We all need to take the energy around and build it up into the kind of person we are supposed to be so that, we can build the synergy with our loved ones. Well said, BK. That's so.
And
Final thoughts?
yes, and before I get to final thoughts, I want to welcome Edwin Bongaman. Lambert, I actually contacted Edwin and I asked if he could join us in these shows. He does exactly what we're doing, slightly different context, but it's pretty much the exact same thing. And I know he will be a value add to this show if we could do it, all three of us. I've already extended the invitation, so to speak, and I would have the conversation here, out in the open, as opposed to just between you and I in the well, behind the scenes. But yes, he is someone who's very resourceful and extremely open-minded. The kind of energy that this platform will really benefit from. Could you say a thing or two to
So,
that?
Edwin, I really want to take this opportunity to welcome you, and I want to thank BK for extending the show. And like he said, we all will benefit from your wisdom, will benefit from your experiences, will benefit from your insight. If only one person could get converted as a result of this conversation, if we can fix one relationship, if we can repair one thing, if we can get just one home, we would have achieved what we set out to do. And many hands do light work. And so I in my capacity as a co-host, because the host has already said so, I say welcome. Brace yourself. Next Monday, we'll be on. Thank you.
So, last words. And I know that there are lots of people out there who struggle with narcissists, who feel trapped and entrapped. They don't know where to go, they don't know where to turn. What I always say is there's nothing that is more important than having a tribe of people who can inspire you, having people with the kinds of insights that can empower you, a place where you can go and be yourself, be energized, a place where you can go and not have to be on your guard, where you can go and feel and be vulnerable with people who love, accept you the way you are, who don't judge you, who love you when you are nasty, love you when you're laughing, cuddle you when you cry. At the same time, they challenge you to grow. So they correct you without judging you. That empowers you, gives you insights, and it helps you go back to an environment which is hostile. You see, because your narcissist typically is that person who's crying out for help. It's just we live in a world where it is a lot easier for us to point fingers than for us to acknowledge that the problems we point at we collectively created and we are collectively responsible for. See, when things go wrong, we look for someone we can hang. Give that dog a bad name and hang it. The narcissist, in my opinion, is that dog we gave a bad name to. Nobody is born a narcissist. Narcissists are formed. They are the product of the environment that we create. And until we realize that it is our collective responsibility to empower the narcissist in a positive way and to empower those who have to live in the ordeal of an environment that is steeped with the venom and the gore of a narcissist. When we get to a point where we realize that if we do not help these people, empower them to deal with narcissists, and if we do not learn how to interact and embrace narcissists, then ultimately the victims of narcissists become our problem. So it's better to deal with it before it becomes a problem, disintegrates into crisis management or disaster recovery. And so I invite us all to be aware. I invite us all to start seeing the narcissist as a traumatically compromised person who seeks help and who is screaming for help. On that note, we'll see you all next week. Thank you.
Karen, welcome. You are too early for the next show. Karen just got in and say hello, guys. But good to have you on, Karen. And BK, thank you very much. Nobody is born a narcissist. Nobody is born a narcissist. It's the lion that we all help to create as a community. And we as a community must now look for the solutions and help the person is crying out. And like I said before, throughout this show, I emphasized one point. Let each of us go back to find out, are we narcissists? Do we display narcissistic tendencies? And how do we deal with them? And how do we deal with people, our loved ones, our partners, our friends? How do we deal with them? As always, thank you. We plan to be on air for 1 hour. We have been on air for 1 hour, 43 minutes. I always want to say thank you to BK. It's just a few minutes to 8 p.m. my time. You must be going on to about 1:32 a.m. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. And again, thank you for all you do. Thank you for your time. Next week, we are going to be on with a new member of the team, Bongaman. I look forward to welcoming you on. And we already have a topic that was suggested by some Stacy. Thank you for that topic, Stacy. We shall take that next week. Until then, goodbye. Enjoy the evening. Enjoy the rest of the week. Be kind to those you see around who are narcissists who need help.